Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, tonight, the Met is also under pressure over a far more recent scandal. An investigation by this programme into the notorious sex abuser Jeffrey Epstein and his alleged partner Ghislaine Maxwell has found multiple claims that the pair targeted, groomed, trafficked and sexually abused at least half a dozen young women in the UK over a 10-year period. The allegations have never been fully investigated by the Metropolitan Police, despite repeated complaints to the force. The Metropolitan Commissioner has previously insisted that any decision not to investigate had nothing to do with Prince Andrew, but that it was a matter for the US authorities where Ghislaine Maxwell is facing trial. But tonight, senior legal figures in the UK who have reviewed our evidence from this country are calling for a full criminal investigation into what they call serious allegations. And just to warn you, my report does contain references to sexual abuse.
I was terrified and I was telling him to stop.
Jeffrey Epstein is dead, but the consequences of his crimes live on. For more than a decade, he used his money and power to abuse hundreds of young women, aided and abetted, it's claimed, by his British partner, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She is a monster. She's worse than Epstein. She was pulling the strings. She had his money. He had her contacts.
Their gilded world now lies in ruins, hunted by the police in America, France and the Caribbean. The investigations have spanned continents. But in this country, there's been a deafening silence from the Metropolitan Police. We raised new questions about what Epstein and Maxwell did here in the UK. We revealed claims of abuse involving multiple separate women in London over the last decade. The true number may be much higher. But despite this, while police forces across the world have launched investigations, Scotland Yard has seemingly done very little. Tonight, we ask why.
There is clearly enough evidence for the police to investigate more thoroughly than they have done.
And one wonders whether there are other issues at play here.
For years, the daughter of disgraced media mogul Robert Maxwell lived a rarefied life in the highest echelons of British society. A regular fixture at the most glamorous parties in Mayfair and Knightsbridge, and close to royalty itself. We've pored over thousands of court documents, accounts, books, photographs and videos, and spoken with multiple sources. They reveal that both Maxwell and Epstein regularly visited the UK, where alleged abuse took place. Some of the cases are well known, but others have never been revealed before. Ghislaine Maxwell will stand trial in America later this year, accused of grooming and trafficking young women and girls for sex.
Maxwell was among Epstein's closest associates and helped him exploit girls who were as young as 14 years old.
The indictment against her is based on the evidence of 4 women who were groomed and abused. The abuse of the third, called only minor victim 3, took place entirely in the UK.
Some of the acts of abuse also took place in Maxwell's residence in London, England.
Maxwell's London home was the scene of the most notorious incident involving a young 17-year-old called Virginia Roberts, now Giuffre. She claims she was trafficked to London and made to have sex with Prince Andrew in 2001.
I implore the people in the UK to stand up beside me, to help me fight this fight.
Prince Andrew insists he doesn't remember her and denies any sexual contact took place.
I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party.
One British victim has spoken out. She's Anushka DiGiorgio, a socialite and model who now lives in the US.
I was involved in that kind of lifestyle growing up, and so I thought I could cope, and I thought I could handle it. By the time I was being raped, it was too late.
She was a teenager when she met Maxwell and Epstein in London, and she claims she was forced to have sex with Epstein multiple times.
When Jeffrey would see me, he would physically shake because he wanted to get at me.
She's by no means the only woman targeted in London. Civil court documents filed by a victim known only as Jane Doe claim she was abused, manipulated and exploited by Epstein in the UK in what she describes as horrific abuse. Here she states she was a naive and uniquely vulnerable 22-year-old when Epstein and Maxwell first preyed upon her. That was around 2001. There followed years of abuse. She claims she was repeatedly raped and forced to give Epstein oral sex. The documents claim this occurred in New York, Palm Beach, New Mexico, London, Paris, on Epstein's private island, on Epstein's airplanes, and other locations. Yet another London victim is referred to in an account in this book on the Epstein scandal, written by the lawyer Bradley Edwards. In it, he tells the story of a woman known only as Fantasia. Another time, while in London, Fantasia and Ghislaine encountered a very young-looking girl who Fantasia thought was innocent and should be left alone. She recounted Maxwell protesting and telling her that someone had to give Epstein a blowjob, and if this new girl didn't do it, then Maxwell herself would have to. And clearly, she didn't want to. We showed the evidence to Harriet Wistrich, a leading sex crime solicitor.
The number of testimonies goes to the likelihood that this was a very big operation of organised sexual exploitation.
Do you think we know the full story of what happened here in the UK?
No, I don't think we do. I have had the opportunity to look at just a little bit of the evidence that exists, and that was quite shocking to me, and that should merit a proper investigation.
So we've tried to find out what really happened. What we've unearthed suggests there was grooming as well as physical abuse. We've spoken to people who knew Ghislaine Maxwell in London. We're told she gravitated towards and surrounded herself with young women. They make me feel young, she'd say. Ghislaine would also invite young women to stay at her townhouse in London and Epstein's mansion in New York. She also offered visits to his private island in the Caribbean with free flights on his private jet.
It kind of worked like a pyramid scheme. Ghislaine brought me in. I brought other girls in. Those girls brought other girls in. And no matter what, Jeffrey constantly had that open revolving door of young women, young teenagers, children, I like to call them, coming through his door for one purpose and one purpose alone.
Nazir Afzal is a former chief Crown prosecutor in the Rochdale grooming gang cases. There appears to be a pattern that young women are approached, they're offered money, modelling opportunities, support for their education, and those offers then led to allegations of sexual abuse. Is that grooming?
That's exactly what it is. Grooming is when an individual, particularly an individual in a sort of power dynamic, uses psychology, uses emotional blackmail, ensures that financial tools are applied, presses every button that a vulnerable person has in order to, in effect, to abuse them. It vitiates consent. So somebody might think, for example, that they have consented to sex, but that consent wasn't true consent, because it was either compliance, so they complied with whatever it is that they were required to do, they acquiesced, which meant they were under control.
And to be clear, you can be groomed even if you're over the age of consent.
It's vulnerability that determines whether you can be groomed or not, and adults can be groomed.
Over and over again, Epstein's victims have spoken of how Ghislaine Maxwell targeted women with the offer of modelling work.
She said she needed models for Victoria's Secret. And because one time I asked, like, why are they so young?
Model Alicia Arden says she was lured to Epstein's hotel room in California where he assaulted her. She left this distressed message for a friend straight afterwards.
I just came out of the hotel from meeting Jeffrey. I didn't expect that I had to be in a bra and underwear in front of him in the hotel room, and then he was touching my butt, and then he got actually a little mad.
The technique of luring young women with modelling opportunities was also deployed right here in Britain. Adela King, now a fashion designer, says she was 20 years old when she met Epstein. In an Instagram post, she says Ghislaine Maxwell invited her here to Claridge's Hotel for a casting campaign for Victoria's Secret. She says Epstein opened the door to his suite and sat down on his sofa and looked through my portfolio and then instructed me to pose in a degrading way and said he'd be in touch. She said she'd had a lucky escape. My heart breaks for all those that didn't. We still don't know how many more women were targeted like Adela, but what we do know is that Epstein spent considerable time here. Flight records disclosed in court cases in the US reveal Epstein's plane flew in and out of UK airports at least 51 times between 1997 and 2012. One was to RAF Marham, just 20 minutes from the Royal Retreat at Sandringham. Epstein and Maxwell went grouse hunting with Prince Andrew and attended his 40th birthday party. They also visited Balmoral. So close was Ghislaine Maxwell to Prince Andrew, this photo captured her and actor Kevin Spacey lounging in the throne room at Buckingham Palace in 2002. It was 2006 when Jeffrey Epstein's appalling crimes first came to light, leading to his conviction. Yet Prince Andrew stayed in close contact with him, making global headlines when he was spotted with him in New York in 2010. Despite the high-profile scandal, all of this seemingly escaped the attention of the police here at Scotland Yard. Until 2015, when a British child abuse campaigner filed a formal complaint claiming that Epstein and Maxwell had trafficked a woman to the UK for sex. The complaint was based on the court testimony of Virginia Roberts, who was just 17 when she said she was pressured by Epstein to have sex with Prince Andrew in London. But astonishingly, as Channel 4 News previously revealed, the Specialist Crime and Operations section that handled the complaint decided not to investigate. We can also reveal that Virginia herself made a complaint directly in 2016. She offered additional evidence and even suggested potential witnesses. But once again, the police failed to investigate. The Met have never acknowledged that this happened. When we put it to them in writing in 2019, they simply ignored the questions. In a statement, the Met told us they were not the appropriate authority to investigate and that any investigation would be largely focused on activities and relationships outside the UK. In November 2016, they said, a decision was made not to proceed to a full criminal investigation, and that was the end of it.
Because just on Prince Andrew, the police did confirm that a complaint had been looked into, but then it wasn't taken any further. Does it worry you at all that this is still the focus of inquiries in the United States, but not here, where the matter is supposed to have taken place?
No, the locus and focus of any investigation in relation to Jeffrey Epstein, for example, is clearly in America. And you know, if the Americans need our assistance at any stage, then we will give them that.
And what we've always needed is a proper investigation. We cannot outsource our investigation to the FBI or to the American Attorney's Office. We have crimes allegedly committed here in London that ought to be prosecuted here in London, or at least be investigated here in London. And on the basis of what I've read, there is more than a reasonable suspicion that crimes have occurred. These are very serious allegations. There is no time limit in the United Kingdom in relation to serious offences, so there is no legal bar here at all.
So if the police were to say, well, the specific laws did not exist to enable us to prosecute those crimes at that particular time, that wouldn't wash with you?
It's nonsense.
If the police had properly investigated, they would have found a swathe of potential witnesses to Ghislaine's activities in Britain. Her now infamous address book, The Black Book, is full of famous names, but also staff and people the couple relied on in London. Drivers, cleaners, food delivery companies, doctors and masseuses. We've tracked some of those people down. None of them would go on camera, but not a single potential witness we spoke to told us they'd been approached by the police. And it's not just witnesses either. Most of the victims we've identified in the UK are listed here in black and white, and there may be more still hidden. The Met have explicitly denied that Prince Andrew's involvement with Maxwell and Epstein had any bearing on their decision not to investigate fully. Do you think that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were treated differently because of their connection with Prince Andrew?
The perception here is that a different approach was taken in relation to these alleged offences than there would be if it was some brown guy in Rochdale or some sex offender in London who didn't have any standing at all. If it were happening anywhere else with any other people involved, there would be no doubt in my mind they would be investigated. You follow the evidence. That has always been my experience. You act without fear or favour. That's always been my experience. And you undermine public confidence when you choose not to do that.
You talked about other issues being potentially in play. Do you think one of those issues might be that Prince Andrew was associated with Ghislaine Maxwell?
It's hard not to conclude that that may be the case. It's clearly an embarrassment for the Met Police. We also know that Met Police will have been involved in his personal protection, and so there may be issues of conflict of interest there. If Prince Andrew was being taken to various premises by his Met personal protection officers, they may have had constructive knowledge of what was going on. It's not a reason not to investigate.
NBC News has learned that disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein took his own life in a prison in New York. Ghislaine Maxwell disappeared, but was tracked down and arrested in New Hampshire in July last year.
We allege that from at least 1994 through at least 1997, Ms. Maxwell assisted Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls by helping to recruit, entice, groom, and abuse children under the age of 18.
Ghislaine Maxwell will stand trial in November. Central to the case against her is her role in grooming and trafficking young women for sex in the US and the UK. She denies the charges, and her legal team have been fighting hard to get the allegations of the British accuser thrown out, claiming that no crimes were committed here. In a few months, we're going to see a British victim, known as Minor Victim 3, stand up in an American court and give evidence about offences that took place here in London, and yet she has never been interviewed by the UK police. What do you make of that?
That's really quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Do you think the Met will be embarrassed?
I think they should be embarrassed.
We put all the evidence to the Met. Tonight they told us they stand by their decision not to open a full criminal investigation. They repeated the claim they always take allegations of sexual abuse seriously, but said they would review the evidence obtained by Channel 4 News. Evidence that has been in plain sight for years, if they'd bothered to look. Well, earlier when I was speaking to the Assistant Commissioner F. Grave, I also asked him about our investigation. We're here today because of your failure over the years to properly investigate the Morgan murder. Tonight, we're reporting there are more than half a dozen claims from women preyed on by Jeffrey Epstein and his associates in the UK. And again, you're not investigating. So will you learn from the past and commit to investigating that now?
I'm here to talk about the Daniel Morgan murder investigation and the report that's come out today, and I want to give due respect to that report, so that's what I'm here to talk about.
Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by Labour's Sarah Jones, who's Shadow Minister for Policing. So we've got two stories on our programme tonight, a failure to properly investigate in the Daniel Morgan case, and then a failure to investigate fully in the Epstein-Maxwell allegations here in the UK. Will you call on the Met tonight to open a formal criminal investigation?
Well, I've just watched the report along with everyone else, so I'm not in a position to say what should or shouldn't happen, but I think there are some principles here that we need to clarify. The first is that nobody should be above the law, whoever they are, and we need to make sure that is always the message with any investigation into any crime. The second thing I think is that we need to do a lot more to put victims at the heart of the way we do law and criminal investigations. And I'm taking through the police crime sentencing and courts bill at the moment, and colleagues are trying to do just that in legislation at the moment. And the last thing is we need to make sure there are places people can go when investigations do, as they do occasionally, go wrong, or where people are unhappy with what's happened. And so a review of the IOPC that the Home Secretary announced today is not unhelpful in this situation.
You say no one is above the law. Is there, in your view, a perception here that the Met might have been wary about launching a full investigation because of Epstein's association with Prince Andrew?
Well, look, I'm just simply not in a position to say, having just seen that report. And we also know that, of course, this whole awful case speaks to police forces beyond the Met, and the investigation is obviously ongoing in America, and it speaks to the wider issues around the Me Too movement of what we as a society kind of accept and turned a blind eye to for many years. So I'm not in a position to say that, but of course, the Met have said that they will look at the evidence that you've provided, and of course that's something that they should do, and we need to make sure victims are heard, and we need to make sure there are processes in place when things are not as they should, that people can complain and justice can be sought.
But given the wealth of evidence that we've set out tonight, in the public domain, in court documents, videos, all sorts of different sources, when the Met declined to fully investigate for a second time in 2019, they said, and I quote, that they always take any allegations concerning sexual exploitation seriously. Does that claim stand up to scrutiny tonight?
Well, I just heard the Met say they would look at what you've provided to them, and I think that's absolutely right. And the principle is that all claims of criminality, particularly we know cases of sexual abuse and exploitation, have been particularly difficult to bring to court and to bring people to justice in the past. Of course, the Met need to look at all of those things, but having just seen that, I'm not in a position to conclude one way or the other. But I do know that nobody should be above the law, and that victims need to be at the heart of everything that we're doing.
Just briefly on the Morgan case, when you have the Morgan family lawyer talking about police corruption being a sickness that has to be addressed, do you have confidence that the police commissioner will address that?
Well, Daniel Morgan's son is a constituent of mine, actually, and I've been speaking to him today, and as you would expect. And I think, firstly, they're really relieved that we have finally the publication of this inquiry. It's a huge document that everyone is taking in, and I think it's for the Met now to, nobody can be under any illusion that this isn't very serious, right, what has been said in this inquiry. The Met need to look at that and to respond and show the leadership of reassuring everybody that they're looking at what happened in the past to make sure it doesn't happen again, but also to make sure, the new recruits that are coming into the Met, the new systems are in place, work as well. But we really want to see justice for Daniel's family.
Sarah Jones, thanks very much for joining us.